Okay, welcome. We're back.
We're back.
Like poltergeist, we're back.
Actually, back in the same house.
Yeah, that's true. We are, today is the 31st, I believe. Yeah, May 31st, 2022. We're on episode 11. This is the last day of the month, isn't it? There's no months with 32 days. This is it.
And then the year's half over. Well, no, we have one more month that's left over. That's
Pretty amazing.
yeah.
It's
I'm
pretty
glad when you're having
amazing.
fun. What are we talking about today, Days?
Stuff. Let's see. There's what we're going to talk about. All right, let's get into it. We left off last week about how we need to be harmonious so that we're not conflicting because the universe wouldn't oppose itself. The principles wouldn't oppose itself through two centers. Um, as human beings, we could oppose each other, but there's negative results that come from that. And the universe is one of order. So I was just listening to something. I don't know what it was the other day. I've heard it several times in the recent past that we're the only creatures that can, for lack of a better term, creatures. Sounds weird. Um, Create our own environment. Like we have air conditioning now. We have roofs over our heads. We can, through the reasoning and capacity and perception, all that, all those mental faculties, we're the only ones that could really create the environment and use our imagination as well. Because, animals create their environment, they make nests, they burrow into the ground or whatever, but they don't have air conditioning, they don't have automobiles, they don't have airplanes, uh, and that's because we are literally the offspring of God endowed with that capacity. And so, having freedom of choice and that capacity, we could arrange things any way we want, whether it's negative or positive. And so we can create the negative things in the world. One of my mentors said that we're the only species that's made a science out of killing ourselves. And he was talking about the food industry and the things that we've developed within what we're putting into our bodies that are harmful, that we put there, and that we've actually created the chemicals, like they didn't even exist. So for either ill or negative or positive results, we have the freedom to choose that, and so that gives us an opportunity to choose and up to elevate and move up the ladder. And I don't know if it's ignorance necessarily all the time that people choose to go down the ladder. That's probably along the lines of psychology and ego and why people would do harm to other people and to themselves ultimately. But that's what this little piece was talking about here, was that the universe wouldn't do that. Like, it's not going to, it's principally based, everything in the universe. It's us with the freedom to, well, it says here, what we are in search of then is a sequence of cause and effect so universal in its nature as to include harmoniously all possible variations of individual expression. And so we want to look for that cause and effect. Like if I do this, I get this result. I love that whole principle of cause and effect, because if you can see what the effects are, if you're not liking the effects, you could see what's causing it, and then you can change that. Like if it's getting harder and harder to, you know, put my pants on, then that's an effect. If I could intelligently figure out, well, what's causing that? Why is my pants getting so tight? Why can't I put them on anymore? Then, if I understand the principles behind what's causing that, oh, it's what I'm putting in my body. And then the more accurate and truthful I could get behind, well, what if nutrition plays a role in that? And what makes something nutritious versus something that's not nutritious? And what makes something, and then exercise playing into that. And then also we can go even deeper, right? Hormones and all that kind of stuff and getting older. So it can help us to control the results that we're getting on one level or another. And
And
so
I
that,
think,
go ahead.
yeah, there's a, first of all, there's a static or something coming through. I don't know if that's just on my computer or if it's coming through it for everyone, but
I don't hear
it went
anything.
away for a second, then okay, it's gone again. So maybe it's just my computer. Anyways, in that sentence, it actually makes room for the all the other possibilities because it's like it's a sequence of cause and effect so universal in nature as to include harmoniously all possible variations of individual expression. What we do sometimes as humans is we get really narrow focused on our interpretation of cause and effect or our interpretation of what's going on. And that causes discord and it's not harmonious, So when we look at how do we make it so universal that the cause and effect is actually bigger than what I think it is. So again, if you're talking about, your pants getting tighter, yes, nutrition is a possible cause, exercise is a possible cause, stress is a possible cause, hormones are a possible cause, there's something biologically wrong, emotions play into it, and realizing that, and that's in scientific studies, that's what they're doing is a true scientific experiment that actually can, validate something the way they do it is by looking at all of the things that correlate and not just looking for one thing to prove because that's impossible. So they look at what else can play into this, what else can play into this, and rolling all of that out and seeing where they overlap. And anyway, so I think that makes me excited because I am so person centered and I'm so in love with the idea that people aren't the same. People don't think the same way, they don't feel the same way, and that's not broken and it's not wrong. So, how do we include everybody, and what all of the fighting that goes on nowadays is, I think, in large part a product of my cause and my effect, and my interpretation of that is the only right way, so yours must be wrong. But if we can step back and say, how can they all be right somehow? Where do they overlap? That's where truth is. So anyway.
Yeah, as you were mentioning that, going back, well, let me go back to the book because it says, it's almost as if it's saying it can include harmoniously all possible variations because through our own personal choices and decisions that we can make, it could cause disharmony, right? So it's saying we could include a harmonious way of doing this, or we could learn the hard way. That's that taking 100% responsibility, right, for the results that I'm getting in my life, rather than being the victim and you know feeling helpless. As creative beings, we should never feel helpless, but the only reason we would is just because we're unaware. So as soon as we start to awaken that awareness of these principles, we do start to take responsibility. We start to be more concerned with the thoughts that we're having and how we're feeling about certain situations, and not letting our emotions get the best of us by, what is it, event plus story, or problem equals story. What is that? You muted out somehow.
Oops, event plus story equals problem.
Yeah, and so we don't have to we become more guarded around that story part of the factor, and making sure that, that's why the cup half full, it aligns with principles when we look at the life as the cup is half full, or when we look at circumstances, what can I learn from this? What's best about this? What's great about this circumstance, even though it produced ill results? That kind of like thinking puts us in alignment with principles that produce, positive results, and we don't even have to know about the principles. So he goes on to say, this primary necessity of the law for which we are seeking should be carefully borne in mind, for it is obvious that any sequence which transgresses this primary essential must be contrary to the very nature of the law itself, and consequently cannot be conducting us to the exercise of true creative power. One of the things that comes to mind reading that right there is like the law of compensation, combined with other laws that really give us the freedom of expression and take it to whatever level we want, the law of abundance. But through the law of compensation, a lot of people think that money is evil. It's not evil. Money is just like your table. It's a inanimate object. It doesn't have any say in the matter. It's bartering, right? And so we all use money. I mean, just to even maybe take that, down a rabbit hole. If we're using money, no matter how little it might be or how unattached we are to money because we think it's evil, we're still using it. You have to use it in today's society. That's how we trade. That's how we make transactions. And so if it's evil, then you're using a little bit of evil versus a lot of evil. So the interpretations that we have around money are so warped and erroneous a lot of the times just because, a few phrases in the Bible that are taken out of context. Abraham was considered one of the most righteous of all, and he was one of the most wealthiest of his time. And so the law of compensation, when I learned that definition behind the law of compensation, like receiving something for my labors that I'm doing, my paycheck, the law of compensation, understanding that, and I'll just give like a very fundamental basic definition, is that somebody needs to receive value more than what they paid in the transaction. So if I sell a car and the car is exactly what I portray it to be to the consumer, it runs great, the AC works, it's got new tires, the belts, all the maintenance has been done on it, and so it's at a high blue book value. There's no scratches, the paint looks great, the interior is great, I've really maintained it, here's all the records. And so I charge high blue book for that. And the customer's totally fine with that because it's in pristine condition. It's in excellent shape. So we make this transaction. He's still getting more value, or that person's still getting the value because the car is worth that much. And so the opposite, so I'm living the law of compensation in that transaction. And therefore I'm getting compensated in a principally harmonious way. Both me as the giver of the object is happy and the receiver of the object is happy as well. They got a car that they love that car and they wanted one that was well maintained. And so both are happy in that exchange. When we break that principle of law of compensation is I portray it as a high blue book car, but I know the transmission's about to go out. I know that, the belts haven't been replaced. The timing belt, which you can't see is inside the engine, hasn't been replaced, and it was due 500 miles ago. But I don't let the customer know that who's buying it from me. Like they could drive that car away and it could break down because, there's a problem with the suspension or whatever other things that I haven't maintained that I said I have. And so I am breaking the law of compensation. They're paying high blue book for a car. Maybe if it's even been wrecked. And this person doesn't know. They can't tell how to look at the paint and they didn't get the body inspected by an alignment to make sure that everything was, it was trued. It was everything's the way that it needs to be structurally. But I tell them, no, the car's never been in a wreck. And the only reason it looks great is because I got it repainted and got the body work done, but there was some damage that was done to the suspension that was way too expensive. So I didn't fix that part, right? So I'm portraying it as a high blue book value. And this becomes very profound when we understand this on a practical level in our own lives. So I sell the car to the person, they pay me high blue book value, but it wasn't even worth low blue book. It was like what do they call it? A salvage title. But it wasn't salvage titled, so I got away with it, but it's literally not even salvage title worthy, right? Which would be way less expensive. So I ripped that person off. I misled them. That person didn't break the law of compensation. I did. And that will come back to bite me. There is no action where you can break a principle that doesn't come back to get you. It might get you in that transaction. Maybe the guy takes you to court or whatever, and you lose if you had a license to sell cars or whatever, it's going to come back. There's a negative that always comes back when you break universal principles. But on just the opposite side of that, if you live universal principles, you're always going to be blessed with more than that actual transaction had created in that moment. And So if we could find things in our lives where we can add value, doesn't matter what it is. Like I talked about this, I think on the first podcast, season 1, where like if you owned a donut shop and you sell retail, and like if you gave like value to each purchase somehow, whether even cleaning and making sure the place is really nice and clean, that's value that you're adding to the customer when they come in. Making sure that there's no sticky tables and the floor is not sticky and you have nice hangings on the wall or whatever, making it a really pleasant experience, having nice music, that's adding value. And really, that doesn't really cost you anything, but that's going to come back in the way of giving you more of what you're desiring through the transactions that you're making. And if you really take it to a high level, there's a lot of value you can add in a lot of ways. Like Carrie, when we opened the shop, the automotive shop, we washed every car, like we detailed every car. And we had no customer base. And within months, we were so busy because of the value that we added. You know, people would have paid 4 times as much to have their car detailed the way we washed them for them coming in and getting an oil change. Because we did everything. We armor all the tire, we cleaned the inside, we vacuumed it, we did the windows inside and out, hand washed, hand dried. I mean, the car looked like it had been detailed. And they didn't pay anything for that. So that blessing came back to us in many ways, that we became a successful automotive repair shop with no clientele in the beginning. I mean, think about that. And the blessings that come back, just like the negative results that come back. It's the whole yin and yang. That's what that whole, you know, where it has the swirly thing, the black and white, and it's that symbol. So anyways, the law of compensation is very powerful because there's an inestimable amount of arrangements that you can harmoniously put together in adding value into people's lives with what you do on a daily basis. And the more we go out of our way, we call that like rolling out the red carpet. Excellent customer service. Any kind of value you can add is going to bless you financially coming back the other way and in other ways as well. Make sense?
Yeah. I have a couple of thoughts. One of them is kind of a question for pondering, food for thought. If we are the ones giving, so we're creating that value in our proactive interactions with people. That's one thing. What if we've been wronged? What if we're the one that buys the lemon car, the salvage title, thinking that we're getting high blue book? How do we, as that person, tap into the law of compensation? Do we attack? Do we, you know, maybe that person later comes to us and asks for help and we're like, no, because you did this to me? Or do we, again, offer value, you know, because of the value that we have to offer without limiting it because of what's been done to us? And that can apply in families, can apply in friendships, it can apply in business and all kinds of things, you know. So it's just food for thought to ponder.
Can I interject something right there with that? Because I think it's pretty interesting and it goes down a rabbit hole, but it's a common sense rabbit hole if we understand it. That person would have to reverse engineer because they harmoniously, that person attracted that car salesman and that car salesman attracted that buyer. There's no mistake and there's no coincidence on how they came together. So even though this person was wronged, they contributed to that themselves. And everybody's like, in the movie The Secret, they're like, well, no, I didn't like want to go out and buy a car where I was going to get ripped off. I didn't have those kinds of thoughts. But if we reversed engineered it, we would find something in that buyer's paradigm, in their intention, in their expectation, whatever it is, that actually led them to that dishonest salesman. So again, we could talk about that later, but I don't know if you were going to address that, but that if we reverse engineered the buyer, we could find something where we could reverse engineer it and we could course correct that so that that doesn't happen anymore in the future.
Yeah, or you know, and just paying it forward as far as like how do I want to show up regardless can help to untie, because those paradigms that we all have we didn't create them on purpose. And so, I mean, we could consider ourselves victim, but we don't create our core beliefs on purpose. They're wired into our brain by our parents, by through our temperament type, and by the environment at large. So we can remain victims, and those paradigms can be there, and they lead us, you know, to all of these things that end up attracting. We always get what we expect. So if I have a belief that was wired into me because of my interactions with my parents and etc., then we're going to get what we expect, regardless of, even if we're aware of it or not. We interact with people in a way that is in alignment with what we believe about ourselves and about people. And then because of the way we interact, we get what we expect, which then proves that what we expect is true. So there's that, and that could be a rabbit hole too. The other thing I wanted to mention, which kind of goes along with all of this, I want to go back to that, to the conversation about the cup half full versus the cup half empty. And if you're looking at that in alignment with the law of compensation, I understand what that analogy and that metaphor means. And I believe in the principle of it is better to think of the cup half full than it is to think of it half empty. And if we stay there with that kind of thinking, then the law of compensation still isn't in full effect, because we're still thinking of a cup and my capacity equals the cup. And not only, excuse me, am I limiting myself in the capacity of what's available to me, I'm also becoming very, I'm going to use the word stressed. And again, it's not a conscious stress, but unconsciously I'm stressed, because if I lose one drop of water, then I'm half empty. And so I'm guarding my drops of water, and I'm expecting drops of water to come to me from other people or from situations. And I only have a capacity to hold so much. And so it's like if I'm having to guard every single thought that I have unconsciously, and watch for those, be aware of those, and then change those, that's like that cup. I've got these thoughts that are going, and I've got to watch all the 60,000 thoughts that I have every single day. That can be stressful. And that in my mind and my understanding kind of goes against the law of compensation. If I can get rid of the cup and realize that there's an abundant source of supply, and I don't have to worry about a cup and whether my cup is half full or half empty. I know that there's a source that's infinite, and I can tap into that. And I know that there is, there's a way that I can adjust my automatic thoughts so that my automatic thoughts become more positive and more in alignment with my belief that there is an abundance, instead of catching myself, you know, worrying about my checking account, and then like, oh shoot, I need to think positive. I have infinite amount of, but then we still have this stress because it's like, okay, my next thought. But when we can really understand that there is an abundance, and we can rewire the programming that is causing all of those automatic thoughts, that opens us up to abundance. And so there's so much more. And the reason I say this is because thought is super powerful. Like, human beings are the only creatures on earth that have the ability to choose the way we think. And that's only 10% of our brain, but that 10% of our brain is super powerful. And it's still only 10% of our brain. And a lot of us, and you were talking about, you know, why do people, sorry, I went from really humid weather for a week back to dry, and it's affecting my voice a little bit. You were saying, why do we go, I don't remember the words that you used, but why do human beings, you know, think backward and think downward instead of upward? And that's a big part of it, because 90% of our brain was wired, 80% of that was wired before we could even talk and have words. And so we've got this programming going on, and we've got to be aware of the fact that it's more than just what I consciously think. I've got to pay attention to what I'm subconsciously thinking, and then tap into the source that can help that be changed, so that I can be more in alignment with what is really going on, instead of my own personal cause and effect. If I have to only worry about my own personal cause effect all of the time, I'm always going to feel limitation. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So again, going back to that universal harmonious truth that there's more to cause and effect than just what I'm consciously thinking. And when I'm allow myself to open up and see all of that, then I can really have the power to make changes that are going to be long lasting, they're going to be abundant, and they're going to be contributing to society other than just making sure I'm maintaining my half fullness. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's a process, it's a journey, right?
Yeah,
It doesn't happen
totally.
overnight.
It's a lifelong process. So
As we continue to learn and apply and then adjust and learn and apply and then see the results and evaluate and discover new things. Yeah, exactly. Again, going back to what they say in The Secret, like, I don't want that result. And you're telling me that I attracted it like I did? No, it's just like what you were just saying. So this is the whole awakening that has led to this podcast. The first podcast and this one still is because understanding how all that works, the principles help us to reverse engineer things. And there's books out there that explain these principles very well, like this one does. And he's going to get into it, like cause and effect, and what are the principles that we can control in our lives and our endeavors. So it's in this awakening that exposed the air of being a victim, like feeling like I don't have any control. And so the buyer of the car that got ripped off, we go through life with those kinds of experiences, feeling like we have no say in it. Like that person is to blame and they're the ones that did that to me and they need to be brought to justice. And maybe they do, but if those things keep happening, then we just kind of look at our lives like we look at other people and we say, well, when they have the kind of lifestyle that's different than ours and it's better, we're like, they're so lucky. Luck has nothing to do with it, and it's not favoritism by God, and it's not they're deserving it in spite of all the mistakes they're making. They just learned how to govern themselves internally and externally in a way that is empowering them to get the results that they're wanting. Just like when a farmer plants a seed, they know in the future what's going to, through all of the principles they obey in farming, they know exactly what the crop is going to be, what the harvest is going to be. There's no like second guessing it. And our lives can be like that when we understand the principles of farming in our own lives with the results that we want to get. What is the crop that you're wanting to get in your life? There's an exact principle. Sterling W. Sills wrote a book called The Law of the Harvest. It's a great book. I recommend it. So the best way to overcome, like you were saying, like how do we fight those feelings? I remember Bob Proctor saying, if you have lack and you're in debt, then get on a good debt reduction program. Get yourself into an action that's in alignment with where you're wanting to go. Then as you're visualizing money in the bank, because visualization and using that imagination and feeling, the law of assumption, there's a principle of that. What we think about, we bring about. So as we get on a good debt reduction program, that's an action that we take. It helps us to be more harmoniously thinking when we fantasize and use that law of assumption, that vision of our future and how we'd like it to be. Why? Because we're working proactively in reducing the debt by getting on a debt reduction program, and action breeds faith. Inaction breeds doubt and fear. So if we're just constantly complaining about something, what we need to do is focus on, okay, what is it that I want? How can I move in that direction? What are all the different dynamics and things that I can do to start moving in that direction? So if my pants are getting tighter, then as I start to work out and start to eat right, and if I don't change my identity, then the working out, I'll still sabotage myself. I'll still end up in this area up here if I don't have the right mindset, the cup half full. What is it? Faith without works is dead. But works without faith is just as dead. And so we have to have the right mindset. So when we get into action and start to create those habits that produce the results that we want, we also got to create the right mindset. And that's what I was missing. That's what I had awakened to, was getting the right mindset. I mostly had the right mindset until a challenge came around. And then I was breaking principles. And through the breaking of those principles, I wasn't able to get the results that I wanted. And I didn't know I was breaking those principles. Very frustrating when you're an action-oriented person like I am. So again, this stuff is going to make more sense. We're talking about it from a place of knowing what the principles are. And, if you're a brand new listener, you're like, well, I don't get it, So the awakening is going to be in what are the laws that govern the cause and effect. And we're going to be getting into those. But he's just, again, I think he's arguing the case here and just kind of setting us up for that. All right, and we're at the time now, so let's just finish off this sentence and start the next one and see where it's going. Law itself, and consequently cannot be conducting us to the exercise of true creative power. So this is what we want. We want true creative power. And it's not, we don't get what we want, we get what we are. And what we are is made up of the thoughts and the feelings and the identity that we have of ourselves and that we think other people have of us. So we can change that. We can redesign, we can put together an identity that we would like to be, and then that's when most people break the principles. They have an identity of what they would like to have, but then they're breaking the principles and going about trying to achieve it. So what we are seeking, therefore, is to discover how to arrange things in such an order as to set in motion a train of causation that will harmonize our own conditions without antagonizing the exercise of a like power by others. And that we'll pick up on there on the next one, but what we're really wanting to arrange is the thoughts and feelings and the ideas that we're having within us, and getting that into a coherent, organized fashion that we maintain on a consistent level. Not easy to do. In fact, it's the most difficult thing there is to do, but it's the greatest achievement that you will ever accomplish, is learning how to control your thoughts and feelings and your ideas and the images that you hold inside you. So that's where we'll pick up on, is starting to get into probably the law of assumption, the law of non-resistance, and those two principles. But any last thoughts before we end up here?
No,
Right. I don't have any thoughts about any of that. Yeah, right.
I can't not have thoughts, and so I have to be careful, especially when we're at the last minute. But I'm excited about the train in motion, because a lot of where we get stuck is stuckness. We get stuck in those ties, and learning how to reconceptualize and reorganize things that have happened, and so that it's a moving train instead of I'm stuck here, is a really fascinating and powerful concept. So anyway, I'm excited about it.
I think it's going to be fun to get into, especially with your education. Our past tends to lend towards creating our identity, and a very powerful identity that we get, emotionally and experientially attached to. But that doesn't mean that's who we are. That's just what we've experienced. And it'll be fun to get into that. And also, one other thing here too, to set you on a thought process until the next podcast, is the causation through governing the internal. There's things that happen out of our senses, out of our five senses and awareness in our environment, that we attract to us like a magnet. And we can't see that with our physical senses. But when we disrupt what's going on inside us internally with our thoughts and feelings, it sets forth a causation that's out of our awareness, mental, with our finite mind and our finite senses. But there are things that are literally going to happen that respond to you and what's going on inside. And we know this like we know this. I mean, this is like a fact to us. There's nothing that could, persuade us to not know that, because we've seen it and we've watched it as we become awakened to it, and all the reconfirming evidences that have happened over the last 17 years now. It's undeniable. But there's a lot of people that are unaware of that causation that takes place either in their behalf or not in their behalf. That causation starts from within us. As on the inside, so on the outside. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Well, that's a very profound statement that has a lot more to it than most people are aware of. All right, any last thought? We can spend one more minute if you want.
Just a funny one. We keep saying, and he's going to get into that. I can just hear people saying, well, just let him get into it then, get out of his way. Because we just keep stopping the process. No, but that's what this podcast is all about, right? Is, slow and not just forward, but also going deep with it, which is part of what I love about it. So,
Yeah, and even statements like that, like you're going to be like a magnet and you're going to attract things out of your awareness. That's part of that understanding of these principles. And
yeah,
so consider those things. Like we're not just speaking just to speak. Everything we're saying pretty much 99.9% of the time has something to do with the behind the curtain scene that's taking place through these principles
yeah,
that are more
100%.
subtle and unseen.
Yeah. So, we're not here to read a book. You can do that on your own. This is a conversation about behind the scenes. I like that. We're peeling back the curtain.
Yeah. All right, you guys, have an awesome day and we'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.